Alright, we are ready to start assembly. So lay your back piece right side up and your front piece is right side down. Make sure that you have the center toward the center so that you have the correct shoulders you're matching up. So what we're going to do is to start, just sew your shoulder seams together right up there, and then that's just a straight stitch at 3/8 inch along here. Then you're gonna press, so you can see the stitching there, press the seam open and seam allowance to the back, so you make a nice crisp seam there. You want to do that with your self fabric and your lining so that you have front and back connected. We are now ready to start attaching the self fabric, main fabric to the lining. So lay your main fabric right side up, and we're going to lay the lining right side down and start by matching up all of the seams and start clipping or pinning it together. Alright, I've clipped all the way around the front and neckline. I'm going to stitch this together. You can start at one end. I like to start in the middle back and go down one side and then down the other, so if anything gets shifted or out of place, this is a really long seam. That way you make sure that anything that ends up a little bit off is on the bottom, on the side, where you can clean it up later, so you don't get any accidental bunching or shifting up at the top, to keep it all neat and clean. I'm going to do that 3/8 inch stitching all the way around. I sewed that front seam all the way along, and then I turned it right side out, pressed it, as you can see. Now this next step is understitching, and you're going to skip it if you're doing a reversible vest. So real quick, for reversible vest, you have the choice of either top stitching all of this after it's pressed, if you don't mind seeing the stitches, or you just press it really well, poke out those corners nice and sharp, and call it good. That's personal preference, totally up to you. So now understitching, for if you have facing, which we do, what understitching is it's a way of stitching so that you secure the lining on the other side to the seam allowance without having any stitching showing along the front of the vest. To do that, we're going to go in here, and the seam allowance here, this is the main fabric, and this is the facing, or in this case, connected to the lining. So we're going to do it here at this seam, and we're stitching this seam allowance to the facing. We're going to do that as far as we can into this area, and we're going to get close to these corners, and you can't really understitch these corners too well, so you just go as far as you can so that it stays nice. You don't want it, if it starts getting kind of difficult and starts bunching up near the corner here, stop, just go to the other side of the corner, and then we're going to stitch the seam allowance along there. Again, you skip over the corner and then do that all the way up and around. Again, we are sewing at the intersection of the facing, lining, and the main fabric. You don't want to do this on where the facing connects to the lining. It's for the edge of the main fabric. Seam allowance toward the facing. And as I sew, I'm going to be pulling that seam nice and tight, because on the other side we want to make sure that the lining is pulled over, that there's no bunching up in that seam. So pulling that seam open and sewing the seam allowance to the lining side. Again, this just keeps the lining from rolling out to the outside, keeps it nice and hidden. Okay, I'm getting close to this corner now. Just going to go a little further, secure it, and then I'm just going to skip over, get a little extra thread. I'm going to skip all the way past that second corner as well, at the bottom of the vest now. Or we're moving along to the front side. I just did the bottom. And keep going. And we're going to continue this along the back of the neck and then all the way down the other side. I finished understitching, and you can see where I've skipped the corners here. I just want to go through and clip those threads, because otherwise it causes that bunching. Make sure that releases. And then you can see on this side, I'm going to turn it right side out. Again, snipping those threads. See, on the right side there is no stitching showing, but on the wrong side, on the lining side, you see that understitching, except in these corners along there. And you see how that's pulled the front fabric around to the back, so that you can see the front fabric from the lining side, but you don't see any of the lining from the front side. Flipping it all inside out again, and this time we are going to sew the arm side edges. So we're lining this up, sewing the self fabric to the lining. Matching shoulder seams, everything else. Front and back. So there's that. And we'll do the other side. I'm also doing the bottom of the back. So we'll line that up. Line up those seams and dart edges. And we'll stitch along there. What we're not sewing up, leaving open, is the side seam on the back, as well as side seam on the front here. Okay, so leave those two places open. I've sewn up all of those seams, and once again, all that's left open are the front side seams and the back side seams. So now we're going to turn it right side out. So I'm going to reach through the back, one of the back side seams, all the way up through the shoulder. This gets a little tight, and over to this other open side. And I'm going to start pulling that front all the way through to turn it right side out. The shoulder gets a little bit tight, so you just kind of have to gently tug the fabric through this side. Once you have everything straightened out and pretty much where it should be, you will go over to your iron and press all of those seams. Get everything nice and crisp. All of the edges are nicely pressed. You can see how nicely this is coming together and starting to look finished. We'll do a final press after everything is sewn up to clean up a few of these creases and everything. Now, the part that is a little more complicated, but the last step of assembly, we're going to lay it so the right side of the back is right side up, and then lay the other side over it here, like that. So it's basically putting it together inside out. Now, taking the main fabric and putting it together there, and that's what we're going to stitch together next. So move the lining out of the way, clip or pin along that fabric. Now where we're going to sew is along here, and then starting on the lining, because we want to make sure that all of the open part left is on the lining. So we're going to start sewing up here, sew all the way down along here, and then as far back onto the lining as we can. It's just kind of rolling back onto itself like that, as far as you can get. Starting on the lining. Finish this side, we're going to do the same thing to start, lining it up, right sides of the vest together, and then only grabbing that main fabric, that middle, the inside of the sandwich basically, and clip it. Now we're sewing the last side seam. Start on the lining as before. Come into the end of the main fabric again. Moving on to the lining and continuing to manipulate this seam, these raw edges, to just keep sewing. And this side I'm going to work a little harder to keep going as far as I can, because whatever's left unsewn needs to be hand stitched. That's pretty good motivation to just keep sewing. Starting to get pretty tight. I can go a little further. Alright. Doing pretty good. Get 1 more inch. Alright, and here it's starting to fold back on itself, so we won't go much further than that. Now, flip it out and we'll see how much left we have to sew. There we go. Got this right here. This is what's going to be ladder stitched. And we will do that tomorrow.